Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In the last episode, you watched us pull the entire driveline out of the C7 Corvette due to a busted torque tube and oil pan from a neutral drop. The new torque tube did not come with a bell housing, so we had to order one of those. We got that in. We got the oil pan. We got it put on. Torque tube made it up to the trans. Converter bolts are in it. So in this episode, we're gonna start putting this thing back together. We're gonna get the engine set back on the subframe, get everything bolted up, the headers back on it, the intake back on it, get it ready to go back in the car. We're gonna attempt to possibly get it slid back into place today, but if we don't have time, we'll jump on that tomorrow when Sammy gets here. We do have Andrew helping us today. It's me, him, and Emma. So let's go. We're about to dive into this thing and see what we can get accomplished today. All right, so we got the engine back on the cradle. We've got the headers bolted up. We got his intake on. We got the flex plate and the bell housing on there. Eddie's got our little wheel dollies, so we're gonna pick those up this afternoon. And then we're gonna come in the morning. We're gonna get this thing set on the wheel dollies. That way we can move it around a little bit and get it aligned with the body of the car. We're gonna set this thing down and get it all bolted up first thing in the morning, and then try to slam the torque tube in this thing. Get this thing hooked up, get the fluids in it, get it fired up, and hopefully it can go home before Freedom Day. Kid can go do some more neutral drops and blow his shit up again for 4th of July, America. The biggest thing is we've had to move the subframe from where we initially set it out of the car, so it's not lined up with where it needs to be, and clearly that thing's not going to be very light. So we probably could wrestle it around and get it lined up the way we need to, but I feel like if we got the wheel dollies, stack the blocks on that, and we were able to roll this thing around a little bit while we've got the car coming down, it'll just be so much easier to align it. We're also going to show you guys a few tech tips, a few little things to watch out for if you ever are working on a C5 and up Corvette. Way to align the torque tube. Essentially how GM recommends to install and uninstall the torque tube, trans, and diff. We didn't pull any rod caps or main caps off this motor while we had it apart, but we did visually inspect everything and we checked for a lot of free play. There was a little bit of play in the rods, but there wasn't, I wouldn't call it excessive. But I have heard that once these things grenade a torque tube, as this one did, it can very easily hurt the motor. And there's stories of people replacing the torque tube and getting them back together and the bottom end of the motor going out within a short period of time. You know, whether to say that actually was from the torque tube being ruined and the motor being hurt, or if that was due to an improper installation of the torque tube, who knows. But luckily we know how to put these things in, so we'll be able to set it just right and give it what it wants before we clamp down that hub right there on the back of the flex plate. All right, so we got the engine back on the subframe, we got the intake on it, we got the headers on it, we got all that done yesterday afternoon. We come in this morning, we brought our wheel dollies in with us, and we've got this thing transferred over to those so we can roll it around and line it up as we bring the car down. We're about to go ahead and start inching this thing down and try to get them mated back together, start hooking everything up for the engine. So let's go ahead and dive into this and get these things married back together. do the suspension, take it up in there and do the underneath stuff. We're rolling now. Alright, so we did have to pull the intake back off this thing to plug in the fuel rail connectors and get our vacuum line for the booster and vacuum pump ran properly. We got that fixed. Intake's back on. Sammy's buttoning up that side now. Alright, so we got the motor in. I would say probably 90% of everything hooked up and ready to go up front. We did get the torque tube loaded up on the trans jack. And we are getting ready to stab this half and get the rear subframe back in this thing. That way tomorrow we can come in and get it all buttoned up and ready to go. It's that hub we were talking about before. We get access to it through here. So we went ahead and got the rear subframe, the diff, torque tube and trans both back in this thing. We'll come in tomorrow and get it all buttoned up and fired off. Did go ahead and order fluids, got the over axle in it. A little bit of wiring to hook up, fasten down and everything. We're getting close on this thing. Dive back into it in the morning, keep rocking. Alright, so we are back in here today working on this C7 Vet. Yesterday we got the motor, the front subframe bolted back in the car, got just about everything hooked up. We got the torque tube, trans, and diff back in the car, got the rear subframe in before we called it a day. So today we've got to hook up all our suspension stuff, button up a little bit of wiring, do the exhaust, top this thing off with fluids, and get it ready to go home. Like I said, we got the rear subframe in. Once we get his brake line situated and stuff, we'll bolt everything up. Went ahead and got the heat shield in that covers the torque tube from the exhaust. Alright, so we got the rear suspension bolted up, control arm, shock. We got the toe link started, but we still got to run those down. About to go ahead and get the brakes on the rear, get the parking brake cable buttoned up, and that'll pretty much button up the rear. Then we've got to do the same thing on the front, the suspension, the brakes, and all that. And then we're pretty much down to air box and put the hood back on it and put some fluids in it. So we're going to try to slam this thing out. Today is like the hottest day of the year so far. Supposed to have a heat index of like 115 today. Right now it's almost 1 o'clock, and we're starting to feel it in here a little bit. So we're trying to button this thing up kind of quick and get it out of here. That way we can go to the house before it gets absolutely scorching outside. But race against the sun is not looking like it's in our favor. So we're gonna keep trucking and throw these rear brakes on real quick, move to the front, and try to knock some stuff out. So when I worked at the dealership, we got a Corvette on trade, C5. I didn't know anything about them. I didn't realize the trans was in the back, none of that. But I wanted to drag race that car a little bit and just drive it and have fun and do some work to it. So Emma and I got very, very familiar with pulling the drive lines out of these cars in a very, very short period of time. I think we ended up having the drive line, or most of the drive line, out of my car 4 or 5 times in the short period that I had it. I had it less than 2 years. And that led to other people needing their Corvettes worked on, so they would bring them to us. And that led to kind of doing more stuff on the newer vets. When I worked at the dealership, we didn't have a whole lot of these come through that needed anything crazy. We had one C8 that was really super low miles that needed lifters. We had, like I did a coolant pump on a supercharged C7. There really wasn't a lot of like major work to do to these at the dealership though. It was always like, you know, a C7 or a C8 came in and needed an oil change, then one of the main techs would do it just because, you know, the dealership didn't trust the oil techs with it or something, I don't know. But a lot of the times it would get handed to somebody that had more experience with the cars, knew how to rack the cars. Good precautionary measure, in my opinion. But since we've went independent and opened 727 Motorsports, we've had hands on quite a few vets, and it's not uncommon for us to go deep into one like this. So we're hoping that sooner or later we'll be able to document and record some episodes on some go fast goodies, and, you know, camming these cars, doing converters, doing clutches, doing gear swaps in on intakes, stuff like that. But for this one, it was just, hey, we got to get this thing back on the road. That's pretty much what we're doing on this one. You know, just stock torque tube and fixing what was damaged, not necessarily add anything to make it go fast. But we're gonna keep trucking, get these Brembos bolted up, and move on forward. Now, there is a lot of things about working on these cars that just make them a pain. The way certain things are set up. I don't think it'll ever matter how many of these we do. We'll always be able to do a truck faster. But we have gotten these down to a pretty good little science of been able to get them apart and together back relatively quickly. Alright, so we're real close to a first fire up on this thing. Emma got the oil in it. I got the intake tube and whatever you want to call that thing there. She's putting coolant and water in it now. We just got to hook the battery up, check for fuel system leaks, bang this thing off. Still got to top the diff fluid and the transmission off, and then we got to charge the AC. Road test this bad boy. Everything underneath is buttoned up. We still got to put the hood on, but we'll deal with that shortly. The owner's going to be coming by at some point this afternoon, so we'll chat with him a little bit, let him see the progress. Gonna run it through a heat cycle, take it up in the air, and tighten that hub on the torque tube as well. It is loose right now, it's about hand tight. So we ran into a little hurdle when we went to fire this thing up on the first start. Did not have the main connector to the trans seated all the way. So we were getting a bunch of transcodes. Started to panic at first, thinking, oh no, we blew the transmission up in this thing too, and now we got to drop the pan. Luckily, we got down there and checked the connector, and we're good to go now. We got this thing fired up. Let it do its first little idle cycle. Now we're about to take it up in the air and tighten down that little hub clamp that's right there behind the flex plate. And we've also got to get our little hitch strut right here. We're gonna pop it off from the bottom, slide it through the bottom, and then bring it back up with us and put it on through the top. It is smoking right now a little bit out of the exhaust. When we flipped the motor over, we did get a little bit of oil inside of the heads. So I'm really thinking that's all that is. We tried to get it all out before we put the motor back in the car, but some of that may have ran down in the exhaust and it is causing it to burn off a little bit. But we'll make sure it's done smoking before it goes home. Make sure nothing crazy is going on with it. So far it's sounding good. Vitals are looking great. So we're gonna keep moving forward and try to get this thing ready to go. Yo, so it's the 4th of July. We're up here finishing up this vet. Come in this morning to knock this out. Emma's up there bleeding the coolant system right now. I gotta do a little road test around the block in this thing, make sure it shifts out, does what it's supposed to do. We ain't got no funky noises or nothing. Don't trip no codes or nothing crazy. All right, guys, we got this thing put back together. We got a road test in it. We got the hood put back on it. We tried to charge the AC. Come to find out, the compressor's locked up. I talked to the owner of the vehicle. It was locked up before it ever came here. We just weren't aware of that. So that was a lost cause, but we're past that now. Car does need to go for a 4-wheel alignment, being that we have both subframes out. He's gonna get that taken care of, and he's getting a new roof for the car. It's ready to go home. That's gonna sum up this episode. We hope you guys enjoyed us pulling the entire driveline out of this thing, setting it in the floor, tinkering with it a little bit, and putting it all back together. If you remember in the last episode, we built a 6-liter with a Brian Tooley Racing Stage 3 LS1, LS2 camshaft. Next episode, we're gonna be putting that in the 2001 Camaro known as Fish Stick. So you guys stay tuned for that. Make sure you smash that subscribe button. Let us know in the comments how you're liking the content. If you have any questions, you want us to touch base on something very specific, try to go into depth on a certain topic or a certain subject. If it's LS or modern LT based, man, that's what we do. That's our platform. We hope everybody had a great 4th of July. And until next time, grab that button.